We begin not with the roar of 100,000 voices in a stadium, nor with the blinding flashes of the paparazzi's bulbs. Instead, we begin with a sound that very few people in history ever truly heard, the silence of a man standing alone in front of a mirror. To the world, this man was the king of pop, a title that carries the immense weight of a crown and the cold, unyielding texture of a statue. But if we are to truly understand Michael Jackson, we must be willing to peel back the layers of the global icon. We must look past the gravity-defying moonwalk, the record-breaking sales, and the sequined armor. To understand Michael, we must look at the man who was arguably the most famous person on the planet, yet felt most at home in a world that didn't exist, a world of perpetual, protected childhood. Michael Jackson's life was not just a career in music, it was a profound, lifelong masterclass in stewardship and the preservation of the soul. He did not view his talent as an achievement of his own ego or a product of his own making. Instead, he spoke of it as a divine assignment. He often remarked that he felt he didn't write his songs, but rather that they were given to him from a source far greater than himself. This belief created a relentless, almost haunting discipline within him. Imagine the focus required for a student in Hong Kong or a technician perfecting a delicate piece of machinery, the understanding that every detail must be flawless because you are handling something sacred. Michael applied this exact technical precision to his very being. He believed that if he wasn't perfect, he was failing the gift he had been entrusted to carry. But we must ask, why this obsession with perfection? Why the need to control every shadow, every note, and every frame of his life? It wasn't about the pursuit of money, and it certainly wasn't about the fleeting high of fame. For Michael, perfection was a shield, the only tool he had to protect the one thing he felt he was losing every single day: his innocence. He was a man who spent his entire adulthood trying to buy back the childhood that was sold to the entertainment industry when he was just 5 years old. He was a child who sang about love before he could truly feel it, and who performed for the world before he had ever played for himself. In this exploration, we are not looking at a celebrity. We are decoding the psychological architecture of a man who built a kingdom called Neverland because the real world was too loud, too demanding, and too devoid of magic. We are seeking to understand the power of no, his ability to reject the cynical norms of adulthood in favor of a higher, more fragile truth. As we sit in the silence of this first scene, we realize that the mirror Michael looked into didn't just show him a face the world had changed, it showed him a boy who was still waiting to be seen for who he was, not what he could do. This is the story of the man who refused to grow up, not out of immaturity, but out of a desperate, beautiful necessity to keep the light of wonder alive in a world that was trying to blow it out. To truly understand Michael Jackson, we have to look at what happened when the cameras were off and the stadium was empty. While the public often used the word natural to describe his talent, Michael himself viewed that term with a certain level of suspicion. To him, genius wasn't a static gift you simply possessed. It was a living, breathing result of a relentless and often haunting discipline. He didn't just aim to be good or great. He was chasing a frequency he called the magic. This was a specific psychological state where the performer's ego dissolved entirely, leaving only the pure, unfiltered emotion of the art. This chase required a level of preparation that would break the spirit of most professionals. When Michael entered the studio for the Thriller or Bad sessions, he didn't come with just songs. He came with a vision of perfection that bordered on the divine. Engineers who worked with him, like Matt Forger or Bruce Swedian, recount stories of Michael recording hundreds of vocal takes for a single line. He wasn't looking for the correct note, he was looking for the soulful one. He often described himself as a vessel, a concept that is critical to understanding his mindset. He believed that music existed in its perfect, finished form somewhere in the universe, and his only job was to be disciplined enough to bring it into the physical world without a single scratch of human error. If a song didn't meet that universal standard, it was discarded, regardless of how much time or money had been spent. Out of nearly 800 songs written during his peak years, only a fraction ever reached the public. This was the power of no in action, the refusal to let mediocrity dilute the message. This obsession extended to his physical form. Think of the iconic moonwalk or the lean-in, smooth criminal. These weren't just dance moves. They were the results of thousands of hours of invisible labor. Michael would spend entire nights in a darkened studio, dancing in front of a mirror until he reached a state of unconscious competence. He studied the greats not to copy them, but to understand the architecture of their movement. He watched Fred Astaire's elegance, James Brown's explosive energy, and the raw storytelling of street dancers. He would distill these influences until they became a new language entirely. He would rehearse a single spin until his shoes literally wore through the soles, not because of vanity, but because of a deep moral obligation. He believed that if he stepped on stage and gave anything less than a miracle, he was betraying the trust of the millions who looked to him for hope. For Michael, mastery wasn't a choice. It was his way of honoring the gift he felt he was only borrowing. To understand why Michael Jackson was so obsessed with perfection, we have to understand the profound emotional deficit he was trying to fill. In March 2001, Michael stood before the Oxford Union, an arena usually reserved for world leaders and Nobel laureates, and delivered what many consider to be his true manifesto. He didn't stand there to talk about record sales or the technicalities of the music industry. Instead, he spoke about a universal calamity, the systematic loss of childhood in the modern world. This speech revealed the why behind every grueling hour he spent in the studio. Michael's pursuit of excellence was, at its core, a lifelong attempt to earn the unconditional love he felt he was denied as a young boy. He was a child who grew up in a world of professional order flow, where his value was measured by his performance on stage and his obedience at home. Because he was forced to become a man before he was allowed to be a boy, he became the world's most fierce protector of the young. He proposed a universal Bill of Rights for children, insisting on the right to be played with, the right to be tucked in, and most critically, the right to be loved without having to earn it. This philosophy was the true foundation of Neverland. To the cynical observer, it was an eccentric playground. To Michael, it was a sanctuary designed to freeze time. He believed that if he could create a world of magic through his art and his home, he could shield other children from the adult world that had demanded so much of him so early. When we look at his work through this lens, we see that he wasn't just performing for us. He was trying to heal a collective trauma. He saw his work as a bridge back to innocence, a way to remind adults what it felt like to look at the world with wonder rather than weariness. He believed that the lack of love was the root of all world conflict, and that by starting with the man in the mirror and the child in the cradle, we could finally heal the world. There is a specific, haunting kind of loneliness that exists only at the very top of the mountain. By the late 1980s, Michael Jackson was no longer just a singer. He was a global phenomenon that had transcended the boundaries of race, language, and culture. He was a figure of such immense scale that his presence could shut down entire cities. But this level of fame created a psychological glass house. He was the most watched man on earth, yet arguably the least understood. To truly understand Michael is to understand a man who was forced to build his own reality because the one we inhabit offered him neither privacy nor peace. This isolation was not merely a byproduct of his success. It became his primary creative engine. When you cannot walk down a street in any major city from Hong Kong to Los Angeles without being mobbed, your inner world becomes your only true sanctuary. Michael retreated into a space where time did not move in the same way it does for the rest of us. Inside this glass house, he could obsess over a single vocal frequency or a single frame of film for weeks at a time. While the world outside was endlessly debating his appearance, his health, or his personal choices, Michael was inside, decoding the frequency of human emotion. He understood a fundamental truth of his craft. To touch the hearts of billions, he had to remain somewhat detached from the mundane, often cynical reality of the millions. However, the cost of this isolation was a profound disconnection from adult norms. Because he lived in a world of his own construction, a world where the rules were dictated by the wonder of a child Rather than the logic of a man, he often failed to see how his actions were perceived by a skeptical public. He spoke the language of childhood wonder in a world that had long since forgotten its own alphabet of innocence. This was the tragedy of his isolation. He gave the world everything he had, only to find that the more he gave, the more the world wanted to look through his windows and find something broken. He wasn't hiding because he had secrets to keep. He was hiding because he was trying to keep his soul from being diluted and distorted by the noise of the crowd. He was a man living in the future of his own imagination, while the rest of the world was still catching up to his past. We often discuss The Man in the Mirror as a chart-topping anthem, a staple of pop culture that defines an era. But for Michael Jackson, it was far more than a song. It was the final thesis of his existence, the intellectual and spiritual conclusion to a life spent under the world's microscope. After the decades of relentless, bone-breaking rehearsals, after the walls of his glass house had been built and battered by the storms of public opinion, and after the world had taken every ounce of energy he had to give, Michael returned to a single, fundamental truth. You cannot heal a world that you are not willing to look at through the lens of your own reflection. He understood that the technical perfection he sought on stage, the millisecond precision of a dance move or the flawless frequency of a vocal, was ultimately hollow if it did not inspire a profound transformation in the heart of the person watching. This is the ultimate understanding of Michael Jackson that we must carry forward. He was not merely trying to entertain us. He was trying to awaken a dormant part of the human spirit. Michael believed that every single person, regardless of their age or their past, carries a spark of that original childhood innocence, the part of us that hasn't yet been hardened by the cynicism of the adult world. His life's work was a persistent, echoing call to look past the noise of societal expectations and reconnect with that original version of ourselves, the version that still believes in the impossible, the version that loves without a prerequisite, and the version that knows that global change is a mathematical impossibility without internal healing. His true legacy is not found in the gold statues, the record-breaking sales, or the sold-out stadiums. It is found in the quiet, private moment when a person decides to be true to themselves and to those they love, even when it is difficult. Michael once said that, in a world filled with hate, we must still dare to hope. In a world filled with anger, we must still dare to comfort. He lived his life as a walking testament to that hope, even when the world gave him every logical reason to surrender. As we close this chapter on his life, we realize that the King of Pop was actually a gardener of the soul, planting seeds of empathy in a concrete world that had grown too cold. The mirror he left behind isn't there to show us our flaws or our aging faces. It is there to show us our untapped potential to be the change we want to see. The music was just the invitation. The transformation is up to us.